How's it going, guys? I'm Fokkerman, your local brick historian. Today is the first episode of Brick Built History. Now, what is this going to be about? Well, it's going to be about Lego kits building military stuff, mostly vehicles like planes and tanks, and I'm going to go over the history and review the kit. So, the very first thing I want to do is get the review done because that's probably what you're most likely wanting to see. So this is the Bf-109 World War II fighter by Brickmania. So as you can see, we have the very front of the kit box here, which I absolutely love their boxes. This 3/4 profile shot is really amazing. And yeah, so you take a look at it. You have some of the legal stuff back there. You have what's called a manufacturer's plate. Working on aviation stuff, I see this all the time. So it basically would have the serial number and part number and all that stuff. But as you can see here, Bf-109E model, which I'll explain the E later. World War II fighter because it flew in World War II. Designed by Cowl, Brickmania kit 2275. 3 out of 5, 291 Lego elements, and 1 custom minifigure. Then you have a side shot of a monochromatic image in its action shot. Really, really cool stuff. And I think I have kit 178. So, let's take this, move it away, and take a look at the kit itself. So, this doesn't come with it. I'll explain that later. So this is the actual built aircraft. So starting from the front, you have a relatively small nose cone compared to the other 109s because the E model doesn't have the signature 20mm cannon shooting through the propeller spinner. So it has a smaller spinner than the later F through K models. The other thing you'll notice is how much yellow is on here. There is a lot of yellow going all the way from the cockpit to the nose here on both wingtips and the entire rudder. So there is a lot of yellow. The purpose of that is so that the ground crews, like the people on the ground with the anti-aircraft guns, can see the bottom of these and go, oh, that's ours, so don't shoot that. As we go back, you can see 2 printed slopes here for the Cowl mounted machine guns, the 7.92 MG91s, I believe they're called, which the E model has, and then I believe the F model through the K model has 13mm MG131s with bulged out cowlings towards the cockpit here. So that's one of the main ways to tell between E through an F through a K model. The other thing is this Supercharger Intake. Now the Daimler-Benz 601 engine that eventually go into the 605 engine with the later models, the Supercharger Intake is on the left side. The UMO engines have it on the right side, which I doubt they would ever do, but if they did an ME or a Bf-109 A through D model, the supercharger would be on the right side, but you know, that would be a really useless one to do since the only time the A through D models were used were during the Spanish Civil War, which I'll get into later. But the squared off supercharger intake is really a big indicator of an E model. Going from the F through the K model, it was cylindrical. So you can take a look at a 109. If it's got a square intake, the cowling is flat, and it would have support bars here on the horizontal stabilizer. That's an E model. So going on, you have, I think this is supposed to be the radiator down here. So yeah, like a radiator here, and you have oil coolers down here in the wings. fuselage mounted landing gear that does retract up. Very nice, very sleek looking for whenever you actually, like, say you want it mounted on the ceiling and you have it like banking, you know, it looks really cool, really swooshable, really fun to hold in the hand. Some of the other details, I like the guns on the wings. They use this piece a lot, I figured out. It's a good piece, so why not continue to use it. Brick built exhaust down here, which the Daimler-Benz and every German engine was an inverted V12, so the pistons were facing downwards, and the aircraft engines, they didn't need exhaust manifolds because the supercharger was forcing air in, so you didn't need the vacuum effect of an exhaust manifold, so it was just straight piped down, or straight piped out. So German aircraft exhaust is down here, while all the others, it was like either mid or on the top of the like engine block, which you're probably gonna start seeing now that that's been said. The wings, really nice with getting this taper here and then this like small, or this more extreme slope to a softer slope. Very nice, very nicely done. You have a brick built canopy with your Luftwaffe ace, could be Gunterol or oh man, I forgot what the top ace was for Germany. The only one I remember is Gunterol. I'm gonna say it's Gunterol. But a nice brick built canopy using very unique technique with this with these revolvers. If you're building this and you want him in there, build him in there before you put this top part on. It is difficult not to completely destroy this to take him in and out. But it is a very beautifully printed minifigure. Lando did a really good job, but I do not want to take the time to take him out. We go back here. This is what's called a razorback, because the fuselage goes straight up to the canopy, so it's the propeller is removable. So the canopy stops at the fuselage back here, so it's just a wall. Visibility is kind of diminished, but it makes a nice aerodynamic down. Really good job with this going up here. Very clever. You have a frying pan tail wheel. The what's called a fin mounted horizontal stabilizer, as you can tell, is actually on the vertical stabilizer. It's not on the fuselage, which is a characteristic of the 109. So really good attention to detail. The supports should be here, but I did try modifying it to put the supports in, and it was difficult. So I can see why they didn't do it. Then you have your very characteristically German vertical stabilizer with the rudder. The Germans, their vertical stabilizers were always this round kind of thing here. They love having a rounded vertical stabilizer, and if you looked at many German aircraft, Messerschmitts, Heinkel's, Junkers, Dorniers, Fokkermans, all of them have this circular vertical stabilizer. Very iconic of a German aircraft. So, all in all, this was a really fun kit to build, really fun kit to make. I think it was maybe $140 US dollars for retail price. So, you know, a nice, like, it would be a nice starter kit to get into Brickmania if you wanted to have an iconic aircraft in your arsenal. So, you might have seen this earlier and thought, what is this? Well, I took my hand into building a micro 109. I looked in the forums, I looked on Instagram and all that, and you know, some people did build 109s, and I was like, yeah, they were good, but I don't think I have those pieces. And I thought, why not build one myself, kind of using this as a basis. So I have the fuselage mounted landing gear down here, yellow nose, try to capture the wing best as possible with this little tiny scale. Canopy really can't do much there. Try to get a razor bag as much as possible, going into as much as a rounded vertical stabilizer as possible without making it like horribly like grotesque. And then the horizontal stabilizer here is just block. So I had fun building this. I think it looks pretty similar to the 109, but anyway, let's talk about the history. So the first thing I want to talk about is the name. So you probably hear Bf-109 and Me-109. I'm not really sure which one is correct. Well, I can tell you both of them are. Well, what do I mean by both? Well, you have to look into the history. So the Bf-109 starts in 1935, and it was designed by Willy Messerschmitt and Robert Lusser. Now, Willy Messerschmitt, which the Messerschmitt company would be named after, he was becoming a prominent designer in the Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, which Flugzeugwerke is basically aircraft factory, so Bayerische aircraft factory. And Bayerische Flugzeugwerke has been around since 1916. They were building Albatros aircraft under license for World War I. After the war, they went into trouble financially, kind of collapsed, but got reinstated in the 20s or 30s. And then they started, they hired Willy Messerschmitt, and he would make the Messerschmitt M20. And it was an abysmal failure. And it would result in the death of a test pilot who just so happened to be a good friend of Erhard Milch. Now, if you don't know who that is, it's probably for a good reason, because I didn't know who he was. He was the minister of the German aircraft ministry. A very Germanic word that I have a hard time to pronounce, so I'm just going to go with the aircraft ministry. So the aircraft ministry would come up with a couple of contests, competitions, whatever you want to call it, to start getting a Luftwaffe built. So the competition for the fighter was the Rüstungsflugzeug 3. I don't know what that translates to, but basically it was the competition for the fighter. Now, Messerschmitt wanted to kind of take the company into the direction of him being the lead designer, being basically the head of the company and having it under his name. But Erhard Milch hated Messerschmitt because of his design killing his friend and seeing like Messerschmitt didn't do enough. So anything that would be under Messerschmitt's name, Milch would immediately not even recognize. So he decided to keep Bayerische Flugzeugwerke's designation of BF in the German designations. Because the way it worked was companies had their own designations. Bayerische Flugzeugwerke had BF, Fokkerman has FW, Henkel has HE, Henschel HS, Horten HO, so on and so forth. So he would keep the Bayerische Flugzeugwerke's BF designation because technically that was his company to go into these trials. So this trial would have 4 total aircraft. You have the Bf-109, the Arado AR-80, the Fokkerman FW-159, and the Henkel HE-112. Now, The Arado and the Focke-Wulf, they were kind of not good. The Focke-Wulf especially, it was absolutely terrible. So both of those kind of dropped out of the competition immediately. So it was up to the Bf-109 and the Ep-112. Now, they were both good. They were both all metal, cantilever monoplanes. They had retracted landing gear. They were armored very well. I think they even had the same engines. So it was basically a tie between those two. And the Luftwaffe didn't really know how to choose. Well, in 1937, a little thing called the Spanish Civil War starts. Now, the Spanish Civil War is kind of seen as forgotten in history because people don't really, especially in America, we really don't talk about it. We really don't say anything about it unless you read The Sun Also Rises, I believe, or Farewell to Arms, I believe. It might be that. But one of the Hemingway books takes place in the Spanish Civil War. So unless you read one of those, you don't know anything about the Spanish Civil War, really. But the Spanish Civil War plays a pivotal role for Germany because it allowed Germany to test its military vehicles, panzers, aircraft, even their guns, in a true war, a civil war. So the Spanish Civil War, you had the Republic of Spain, which wasn't really sponsored by anyone. You had the Communists, sponsored by the Soviets, and you had the Fascists, sponsored by the Italians and the Germans. So the Germans flooded the Fascist Spain with Bf-109s, Ep-112s, Junker 52s, Junker 87s, I believe, Panzer 1s and Panzer 2s, all that stuff to test their stuff. And they really wanted to know which was better, the 109 or the 112. Well, they got their answer. The Spanish absolutely loved the Me-109 or Bf-109. They loved how easily it was able to be maintained on the field, especially in less than satisfactory airfields and all that. So the Germans saw this. The Spaniards were like, hey, we like the 109, so they decided right then and there that the Bf-109 would be their new fighter. So what would lead to the E model? Well, the original 109s, as I said before, were powered by Junkers Jumo 210 engines. And they were not that powerful. They had less than 1,000 horsepower. It was kind of like a good enough for the time, but eventually it was severely lacking. So in around 1938, 1939, they would start putting Daimler-Benz DB601s into the Messerschmitt, and it would change a lot. And especially, as I said before, the going from the right side to the left side with the supercharger. By the way, with aircraft, it's always where the pilot is looking, so the left side, right side. But that was one of the biggest changes of going into the E model, maybe some slight structural changes, but other than that, the engine was the biggest difference, and all the other models would have Daimler-Benz engines going either a 601 or a 605, continuing on down the line. So the E models were coming out basically as soon as the war starts. So whenever they invade Poland, that's when the Luftwaffe was getting their 109Es. And they were kind of pub stomped Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, actually the entire Benelux area, France. Like, France had some like potent aircraft, but they didn't have a lot of them. Norway, like the Balkans, they didn't really stand a chance against 109s because they were flying parasol aircraft or like even biplanes against these more modern fighters, even though this is a 1935 design. Where the E model really found its age was in the Battle of Britain. And in the beginning, it was doing fine. It was doing okay. The Spitfires really weren't that much better than the 109s at the time, especially the Mark 1s. The Hurricanes were actually better than the Spitfires at that point. But the E model was holding its own. But as the Spitfires go into the Mark 3s, Mark 4s, and the Hurricanes go into their higher marks, the E model really starts to suffer. And in fact, I think the only surviving E models were all dug up in England or something like that. But in 1941, they would go into the F model. The F model would have bigger machine guns in the cowling here, which would give them the bulges in the cowling, which signifies the F model. They would go to the cylindrical supercharger intake. I believe they would get rid of the braces on the horizontal stabilizers at this point, and they would put the 20mm cannon in the nose. So that's the first sight of the 20mm cannon in the nose, I believe. But yeah, so the E model would really only last a few years, although I mean the F model lasted only a few years as well, but like thousands of F models were made, like almost 5,000, something like that. Only a couple thousand of these were made, if that. So the F model really stepped up even further from the E model, and then the G models, and then you go into the K models, which there was only a couple hundred, if that, of K models, but the F models and the G models are the most common that you see. So the E model was, they kind of fell to the wayside. They did their good. Like, they did good. It was just the times were changing, and Battle of Britain proved that these things needed an upgrade. So they promptly did. Now, there's only a few E models that are left in the world right now, and I'm talking about genuine, like, E models. So there's one being restored in Finland, 2 in display in Germany, 1 displayed in Poland, 1 displayed in South Africa, 1 displayed in Switzerland, 1 that flies, 3 displays, and 5 restorations in the United Kingdom, 1 flies, 1 display, and 1 restoring in the US. So it's kind of weird to think that after all this time, there's only 2 E models, genuine E models, that are flying. Now, the thing is, you may be thinking like, oh, I've seen videos of Me-109s or Bf-109s flying all the time. I mean, they're not that rare. Well, take a look at the engine, because it might not be a Bf-109. What I mean by that is, like, the Spaniards, they love this so much that they wanted to keep making Bf-109s under license, which Germany agreed. So the Spanish would make a bunch of licensed Bf-109s, but they didn't have Daimler-Benz 605s or 601s, and they would actually use Rolls-Royce engines sometimes. And you'd see 109s with their exhaust up here, which is not a 109, it's probably a Spanish or even is an Israeli version of the 109, because the Israelis would also build their own 109s. So, you know, if you were going to go like, oh, that's a Bf-109, take a look at the exhaust and go, oh, that is not a genuine 109. So hopefully you learned something about the Bf-109 that you didn't before. I really do enjoy looking into these kind of things, seeing like the history of stuff. Hopefully the Brickmania will come out, or Brick Veteran, or whoever would come out with a later version of the 109 where I could show the difference between this model and the later models. But, you know, until then, this is Bf-109E. So, if you learned something, throw a like or comment me something. Tell me like, oh, I didn't know that this was whatsoever or anything like that. You know, I like hearing about all that stuff. If you have any questions of anything that I've said and you want me to delve in further, hey, send me a comment. I read them all the time because there's probably not going to be a lot of them. So, with that said, I've been Fokkerman. This is the brick built history of the Bf-109E. So, like if you like the video, subscribe if you want to see more, because I have 78 Brickmania kits alone, and I've already bought the first Brick Veteran kit, so there's going to be a lot coming in. So, if you liked the video, subscribe for more. I've been Fokkerman, and let's continue to build history.